everybody doing? Hopefully I'll be quick here so you can get to lunch, as I know everybody can smell that food. So obviously thank you everybody for taking the time, and thank you the Transportation Management Authority. I'm Pete Mickartz, the Director of Sales from Zextra, and here today to talk about bike share in general and the impact of bike share, how to implement bike share, and what Zextra specifically has done across the country. So with that, a little bit about Zextra. We've been in business since 2007. Excuse me. Have about 170 deployments nationwide, approaching that 200 number within the next month or so. We have about 30 to 40 bike shares coming on board in March alone, so needless to say we are growing at a very good clip. And we're operating in about 36 states, so it's been a wild ride even from my 1 year at Zextra, but it's growing very quickly. Lastly, Zextra is bike share as a service, so it's a little bit different than most of other bike share companies out there, which we'll get into a little bit more. So next is, why bike share? I mean, the first thing is costs, right? So cost for the end user. I'm a perfect advocate for this, as I just sold one of my cars. My fiance and I had 2 cars living in San Francisco, and we just sold one, so proud to be a perfect example here of car selling. But overall, to own a car, it's about $9,100 a year, right? Everybody knows it's extremely expensive compared to a bike share membership of $50 to $100 a year, right? So you take a look at some of those, costs in general. Oops, geez, whoa. Some of those costs in general of, owning a bicycle or owning a car, it can be extremely expensive. So the second is sustainability. It's about 271 grams per kilometer of CO2 emitted when you're in a single passenger car. On a bike, 21 grams, right? In a bus, somewhere around 100-ish. Obviously, a bus carries more people. People always ask, why 21 grams on a bike, right? The reason being, it's human-powered. People have to have food for fuel. So to grow that fuel or grow that food, it does take some CO2. The last is reliability. As we had talked about linking transportation or linking bike share, 66% of people actually in the City Bike program in New York City link bike share with public transportation or ride share or something else. I mean, that's a pretty staggering stat, right? That 2/3 of people actually link other forms of transportation with bike share. So pretty awesome in general. Bike share is really becoming more popular, and as we start to see it spread across the country. So bike share is a good thing, right? So what do we do now? And it's purely about education. Would bike share work in my community? Why would it work? How would it work, right? The infrastructure, do we have that today? And it's really about, learning about your community, learning about what bike share programs may work here, what bike share models, a lot of different options out there, as there's 2 of us here today in general. So a little bit about some of those models. The first one is the business models, right? So the first big one is capital bike share, much like social bikes or barrier bike share, where you actually buy the assets, right? And then they spin up a nonprofit, and they use the utilization monies or the revenues generated to support that bike share. The second one is bike share as a service, much like Zextra, where it's a flat fee per year per bike, and everything's integrated, right? The last one is a do-it-yourself or a bike library, where you see Fort Collins, Colorado, for instance, that operated one for dozens of years, really, before we had actually taken it over, where you go out and you buy some bikes, and it's a really manual system, right, where people check in bikes in and out. There's a few people that work there. It's at one location, maybe 2 locations, but manual, cumbersome, no technology, that kind of thing. A couple other major things to consider. The first one, which is always at the forefront of people's minds, is funding, right? How do we fund a bike share? Does it come from public funds? Does it come from private funds? And if it's a public-private partnership, how does that work? So in general, what we've seen at Zextra is that if the city, municipality, Transportation Management Authority does throw money or contribute to the bike share, it makes it much more successful. The reason being, if private money is going to get involved, they want to see that the city, municipalities committed to it. So it makes it much more impactful if there is some sort of investment from that municipality or pseudo-municipality. The second one when considering is use case, right? Is it used for transit? First and last mile connections is fantastic in an urban or dense environment, but a lot of times in a suburban environment like Marin, it's going to be a leisure use case or a tourism type use case, right? So it's going to be solving some of those first and last mile connections, but the use case may be completely different. So in sum, I'll wrap it up really quick here. There's a lot of different ways that you can bring bike share to a city. There's a lot of different factors that you can factor in. Business model, use case, how, when, infrastructure, and all those things can be wrapped up into a very expensive feasibility study or even talking to some of the operators of how to bring it to your city. But in general, hopefully bike share is a good thing. There is a model for you out there, whether it be an urban environment, a dense environment, or a suburban environment. That's it.